Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. For those of you that don't know me, I go by the name of JayFlex, and I'm a fellow Gen Z Brit born in the 2000s with a very curious mind. And my curiosity has led me all the way to so many people, and one of them being Thomas Sowell. And this video is going to be talking about the facts about slavery never mentioned in school. Now that is a title and a half. Now I can attest, in the school system that I was brought up in the UK, they don't teach you about slavery. They're not going to teach you about this stuff. So I'm very curious. I feel like we're living in a world right now where especially people are becoming way more alert to kind of how agendas are being pushed, and you know how you can't necessarily trust the mainstream, especially me. Like, you know, so that's even in sparks my idea of, you know what, let me go down and try and figure out and put pieces together for myself, rather than just listening to what people tell me, right? Obviously I'm documenting this journey on my YouTube, so a lot of this stuff, you know, I might fall into some things, I might realize things later on, but that's the whole point, because I really do think people my age especially aren't doing this kind of stuff and trying to gain access to information or trying to learn about these things. So I think it's really important just to do this kind of stuff. And even I want to encourage people to go back and actually look into things for yourself. I'm doing this journey for this curiosity journey. I want to figure out the truth. I'm a truth seeker. I love wisdom. I love learning more things. I don't care about sides. I don't care about being right or wrong. I just care about the truth. And ultimately, I feel like there's an agenda to get everyone to divide amongst each other. So I think it's so much more important that we come together and try and focus on things like the truth, rather than just perpetuate these, you know, picking a side mentality and dividing amongst ourselves, which I do think a lot of people are incentivized to do because controversy sells. But guys, look, if you want to support the channel, ways you can donate and get some exclusive bonus content to me will be linked to my Patreon and my PayPal as well. A lot of videos that get blocked on YouTube, I can't post for copyright reasons. They're going to get posted on there for those of you guys wondering. And it's a great way to support the channel. And of course, look, smash the like button if you want to see me do more of this kind of stuff. And let me know what other videos you want me to check out. And maybe even some books to read and some passages, some articles to check out about some of this stuff. I'll be very enticed to want to do that kind of stuff. I'll be very interested. Of course, look, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Road to 40k is on the books, guys, so please guys subscribe if you haven't already. A lot of you guys watch and don't subscribe, so yes, let's fix that. But guys, look, with that being said, enough of the dilly-dallying. Let's get straight into this video. Let's go. Yeah, shout out to these guys, Thomas Sowell's channel. This book is taken from an excerpt. Well, I don't know if it's his channel, but it's coming from his book.
The instrumental use of the history of slavery today also underlies the claim that slavery grew out of racism. For most of its long history, which includes most of the history of the human race, slavery was largely not the enslavement of racially different people, for the simple reason that only in recent centuries has either the technology or the wealth existed to go to another continent to get slaves and transport them en masse across an ocean.
Right, he's already starting off with, see, already that in itself has already disrupted the status quo that I'm used to, hearing that slavery is a race thing. It's a race issue. When he is saying that is not the case, and even these technologies that have came in are only more recent, and slavery's been going on for a long time. Okay.
For the simple reason that only in recent centuries has either the technology or the wealth existed to go to another continent to get slaves and transport them en masse across an ocean. People were enslaved because they were vulnerable, not because of how they looked.
Right.
The peoples of the Balkans were enslaved by fellow Europeans, as well as by the peoples of the Middle East, for at least 6 centuries before the first African was brought to the Western Hemisphere. Before the modern era, by and large, Europeans enslaved other Europeans, Asians enslaved other Asians, Africans enslaved other Africans, and the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere enslaved other indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere. Slavery was not based on race, much less on theories about race. Only relatively late in history did enslavement across racial lines occur on such a scale as to promote an ideology of racism that outlasted the institution of slavery itself.
Ooh.
Wherever a separate people were enslaved.
Okay, see, again, like I said, this is not stuff that I've heard before, man.
That outlasted the institution of slavery itself. Wherever a separate people were enslaved, they were disdained or despised, whether they were different by country, religion, caste, race, or tribe. In East Africa, the Maasai were feared slave raiders, and other African tribes, either alone or in conjunction with Arabs, enslaved their more vulnerable neighbors. As late as 1891, it was reported that Manyuema slavers had demoralized surrounding tribes, destroying crops, and famine reigned everywhere. Even in the early 20th century, Abyssinians were still raiding other Africans and carrying off slaves. It was 1922 before the British had gained sufficient control in Tanganyika to stamp out slavery there. Arabs were the leading slave raiders in East Africa, ranging over an area larger than all of Europe. The total number of slaves exported from East Africa during the 19th century has been estimated to be at least 2 million.
Ooh.
The form in which the story of slavery has reached most people today has been along the lines of the best-selling book and widely watched television miniseries Roots by Alex Haley.
Ooh.
Challenged on the historical accuracy of Roots, Haley said, "I tried to give my people a myth to live by. This instrumental use of history, or purported history, is open to the same objections as other instrumental myth-making.
That's wild, though. That's wild. So the author, the guy who was behind Roots, is saying that he gave them a myth. Now, let me just double check, because I'm pretty sure myth means like make-believe. Like, that's because a traditional story, especially one concerning the early history of a people, explaining a natural or social phenomenon. One concerning the early history of people as a natural of a people. So he did it of black people, and typically involving supernatural beings or events. Interesting. Supernatural. A widely held but false belief or idea. So in terms of how we meant it, I don't know. He could be saying he's giving them a false belief, so a lie. Or he could be saying he's giving them a traditional story, especially one concerning the history of a people. So he could be just talking about, he wants to give a traditional story based off the history of its people, or explaining or natural or social phenomenon. So it depends on how we use the word myth here. But if it is like, he wanted to give them a false belief or an idea, that's crazy. Like, that's mad, though. I don't know. Maybe I misunderstand that. Let me know what you guys thought about that, because that sounds crazy.
Give my people a myth to live by. This instrumental use of history, or purported history, is open to the same objections as other instrumental myth-making. Despite the impression created by Roots, during the era of the massive slave trade from West Africa, a white man was more likely to catch malaria in Africa than to catch slaves himself.
Okay.
The average life expectancy of a white man in the interior of sub-Saharan Africa at that time was less than 1 year. By and large, men from Europe or the Western Hemisphere came to the coasts of Africa, bought their slaves, and left as soon as possible.
Okay.
Even so, the death rates among the white crews of the ships carrying slaves to the Western Hemisphere were as high as the death rates among the slaves themselves. It was only much later, after quinine and other medical measures enabled Europeans to survive where there were tropical diseases, was it possible for them to invade Africa in force and establish empires there. But by then, the Atlantic slave trade had already been ended. During the era of that trade, Africa was largely ruled by Africans, who established the conditions under which slave sales took place. The crew of a slave ship was in no position to defy African rulers and their armies by going out across the land and capturing people willy-nilly. The stronger African peoples captured and enslaved the weaker peoples. The same pattern found over the centuries in Europe, Asia, the Western Hemisphere, and Polynesia. In Nyasaland, the Ngoni and Yao swaggered over and terrorized other tribes. In Uganda, the Baganda made life miserable for their neighbors. And the Nyoro and Hima of Ankole enslaved Toro women and children. The Tutsi dominated the Hutu in Rwanda, the Maasai lorded it over the Kikuyu and Kamba, and the latter, in turn, held the Indorobo in a kind of serfdom. It was precisely the fact that Europeans, except for the Portuguese, seldom participated in the raids that captured and enslaved Africans that enabled most people in Europe and the Americas to remain oblivious to the traumatic experience that this was, with some Africans committing suicide to avoid capture and wives being whipped as they tried to cling to their husbands or children. Historian David Breon Davis pointed out that Europeans had little contact with the actual process of enslavement, and that, as late as 1721, the Royal African Company asked its agents to investigate the modes of enslavement in the interior. Europeans typically saw only the end results, enslaved people being offered for sale on the coast. It was much the same story in the Ottoman Empire, where those who bought slaves had no idea what these slaves had been through before. The unique position of the Western world in the history.
That's interesting. Okay, so you're saying there's like a lot of people, the Europeans, are like, I guess, benefiting off of these slaves. Like, they didn't even realize themselves what was really going on. So maybe that would have changed the way of thinking. I don't know. But that's interesting stuff hit there.
Had no idea what these slaves had been through before. The unique position of the Western world in the history, and especially the destruction of slavery, need not imply that there was unanimity within the West on this institution. In addition to whites who defended the enslavement of Africans on racial
Wait, say that again.
History, and especially the destruction of slavery, need not imply that there was unanimity within the West on this institution.
Right, so people would
In
all
addition to
agree.
whites who defended the enslavement of Africans on racial grounds, or who opposed general emancipation on social grounds, there were many whites, and even blacks, who defended slavery as a matter of self-interest as slave owners. Although most black owners of slaves in the United States were only nominal owners of members of their own families.
Damn. 10 black slave owners that will tear apart historical perception. Oh my days, bro. I'll say you're not gonna hear that. Look, I'm not, whether or not this is, look, because look, this is, I'm taking what he's saying, let's say what he's saying is true, yeah. You're just not gonna hear that. 10 black slave owners that will tear apart historical perception, because that doesn't fit the narrative that especially I've heard. And I don't even know much about slavery, but even before I even looked into this rabbit hole, like I said, all I thought was slavery is just a racial thing, it's white people enslaving black people along them lines, and like that's the extent of it. But he's saying here that, you know, you'd think that the end of slavery there was like a unanimous thing, is a unanimity there, but it was more like a lot of people didn't want it to end. It's including black people, because I guess some of them were slave owners who capitalized. It was like that's what I'm saying. When it comes to just be killing people's morality here, a lot of people's, because you're gonna see there's gonna be people that are incentivized to profit off of the destruction, because there's money there. I mean, that's half the reason why, like, you know, things like, I think for like things like politics and, you know, things are very divisive, go so far, because it just polarizes people. And if you get people to feel so emotional about something, then who's really benefiting here, man? Because it's not the people, it's the people that are putting out the content that are going to be benefiting the most. Let's be real. Let's call it space. So there's an incentive from what I've seen to propagate a lot of this destruction. And especially when it comes to this kind of stuff here, you don't hear that stuff a lot.
Although most black owners of slaves in the United States were only nominal owners of members of their own families, there were thousands of other blacks in the antebellum South who were commercial slave owners, just like their white counterparts.
You don't hear that,
An
man.
estimated 1/3 of the free persons of color in New Orleans were slave owners, and thousands of these slave owners volunteered to fight for the Confederacy during the Civil War.
Wow.
Black slave owners were even more common in the Caribbean. In short, there were many defenders of slavery in the West, even in the 19th century.
Wow.
And outside the West, slavery was too widely accepted to require defense. No other nation ended slavery in the same way as the United States did, and few ended it after so short a struggle, as history is measured. How and why did slavery end in most of the world? There were two major processes. Over the centuries, as more and more territories around the world consolidated into nation-states with their own armies and navies, raiding those territories to capture and enslave the people who lived within them became more hazardous in itself, and also risked military retaliation against the countries from which the raiders came. Thus, more and more peoples became off-limits to slave raiders over time. Put differently, the areas which remained subject to slave raiding over the centuries were primarily those where the people lived in smaller or weaker societies. Such societies continued to exist where it was difficult, for geographic or other reasons, to consolidate large areas under one government. This was true of the Balkans, the backwaters of Asia, and much of sub-Saharan Africa. By the early modern era, sub-Saharan Africa, with its numerous and severe geographic handicaps, was one of the last remaining areas from which vast numbers of people could be enslaved.
Back in 2022, I lost two very important people in my life.
That's why he's saying
it really wasn't
ended,
until
yeah?
In this
That's why he's saying slavery ended. That's why, because of, I guess, the geographical location, as well as like nations becoming more like people, like, I guess, more civilized and whatnot, and people being off access. So let me hear that last part again.
Main subject to slave raiding over the centuries were primarily those where the people lived in smaller or weaker societies. Such societies continued to exist where it was difficult, for geographic or other reasons, to consolidate large areas under one government. This
because so he's saying that slavery ended just more so because of the difficulty of being able to like keep it going on a mass scale. I guess to the point where it becomes less profitable, and it's like, what's the point? You know, it becomes too much of a hassle. That's interesting. That's interesting. That's interesting stuff. Look, all of this stuff is stuff that I've never heard before. I'm very curious to find out a lot more, because, you know, especially when it comes to these kind of narratives, this is not stuff that you hear quite often. And I am shocked, man. I'm shocked. I'm shocked. I haven't heard this kind of information before. It's very interesting, and you know what? A lot of it is sound. I can hear the reason behind it. I can hear the reasoning behind it. Especially what you're saying about how slavery's been going on for a long time, and it's only up more recently when it became more of a thing of race became more of a thing, and that story that like narrative got propagated even after slavery ended. But you know what, like I'm still new to this stuff, and my brain is I'm slowly starting to grasp these concepts a bit more the more videos I'm listening to, and that's the main thing, right? Like I haven't fully came on like a conclusion or what it really was, but all I can say is I'm educating myself, and I'm becoming a lot more familiar with I guess what's going on. I feel like I'm getting closer to whatever the truth is, and that's the whole point. Well, guys, they've made this point. Comment down a white and black heart for slavery. No, comment down any heart. You know what I'm saying? If you made this point, so I know who my real ones are. And yeah, guys, let me know what you guys thought of what I had to say, what you guys thought of what Thomas said, and let me know what some other things you want me to check out. And guys, look, with that being said, look, I've been your boy JayFlex. This has been Facts About Slavery Never Mentioned in School. And for those of you guys who made this point, you guys have been absolutely wonderful, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.